The world has seen many wars, and will no doubt see many more. One can win a battle and lose the war, or lose a battle and win the war. But there are battles that mean a lot more than winning a war, as if by divine ordination they decide the fate of entire nations, sometimes of whole continents. After such battles, nations and continents can never be the same again. The Black Death. That bloodthirsty monster that eclipses the sun with its massive scaly wings. The Black Death spread its wings over a town that will forever bear the name Byalah, the White. Way back when, it was called Pusta Byalah, deserted the White, and then Nova, the new White. The townsfolk remember the scaly monster entering their yards. For 7 long years, it scythed left and right over a blackened land, and in the dreary mornings after it left, the streets were strewn with lifeless men, women, and animals. But the townsfolk never despaired, never. They went on living in spite of it all, and centuries passed. Byalah's 15 minutes of glory came in the 19th century. For 2 weeks, starting on the 5th of July 1877, it became the capital of the Russian Empire. Bulgaria had spent 5 centuries under Ottoman rule. The town's population was mixed. Bulgarians, Turks, and Gypsies lived together. There were 200 Christian households, 50 Muslim, and 50 Roma. The town would soon double in size, but despite its heterogeneous population, it retained a distinctly Bulgarian character. The tax burden on Bulgarians was much greater, though. They worked the fields of their Turkish landlords, often for free. The Turks were on top of the pile. The Bulgarians, however, schooled their children in their native tongue. Through sheer persistence, they managed to obtain permission for the construction of a church, which duly went up in 1843. They even built a belfry, but the authorities would not let them install a bell, so they turned it into a clock tower. And they dreamt of liberation, of their own country and nation. After a centuries-long intermission, resistance culminated in an April of 1876 uprising that was mercilessly crushed. Thousands lost their lives, the vast majority of them civilians. Women, children, and old people were put to the sword. Public opinion across Europe was scandalized. Oscar Wilde, Victor Hugo, William Gladstone polemicized against the barbaric Turks in numerous fiery speeches and pamphlets, but no one came to the rescue of the Bulgarians. A 26-year-old man, Paniat Volov, was among the ringleaders of the revolt. His punishment was death. Accompanied by two comrades, he attempted to break through to independent Romania. The shortest route was through Byalah. It was here on May the 26th, 1876, that the police caught up with the three. Left without munitions, surrounded in the chilly spring night, they decided they were not to be captured alive. They waded into the icy river Yantra, never to come out. Likely, Bulgaria was doomed to remain a dark Ottoman province. The flower of the nation had perished in the bloody romantic revolutionary endeavor. Many were exiled or fled into foreign lands. The 1876 atrocities against the Bulgarians turned Western public opinion against its own governments. Nicholas' son, Emperor Alexandar II, saw his chance. Emboldened, Alexander declared war on the Porte. The Western powers were not prepared to take a stance in defense of the Ottomans. During the night of June the 14th to the 15th, Russian forces forced the Danube at Svistov. The Turks had expected them at Ruse, Tutrakan, and Nikopol. "17 battalions, under the command of General Mikhail Dragomirov, faced the Svistov garrison led by Ahmed Hamdi Pasha. The Russian fleet took care to mine the river as far as the delta on the Black Sea. They used a huge number of naval mines to deny the Ottoman ships access to the navigable parts of the river. With the Turks blocked in the docks, the Russians established a bridgehead at Zimnich and landed at Svistov. By late afternoon the following day, the Russians had full control of the town. The town was the first Bulgarian settlement to be liberated. To them, wrestling out territory on the Ottoman side of the Danube was of foremost importance. Once that was accomplished, their engineer corps wasted no time building pontoon bridges to link the two shores. As soon as they were operational, thousands of troops poured across, as well as weapons, munitions, supplies, and draft animals pulling enormous war transports. The Russians split into three groups. The so-called Forward Regiment pressed towards the Balkan mountain chain. The main force formed an eastern and western group and focused on defending the bridgehead. The eastern group had its own supply bridge. The western group had two. Around 160 wooden pontoons went into the construction of each bridge, as well as an enormous amount of labor and money. 230,000 gold French francs, or around 1 million euro in today's currency. The shortest route between the Russian forces and the Danube passed through Byalah. The settlement was taken a mere week after the fall of Svistov. It was still a village, though to all intents and purposes, everyone regarded it as a town. Its population since the 1830s has passed the 1,000 mark. Despite the return of the Black Death between 1831 and 1836, Byalah retained its urban features. The clock tower was completed 5 years after the arrival of the Russians. It had cost the Ottoman equivalent of around 39,000 euro. The local bourgeoisie, the tradesmen and craftsmen, donated the money specifically for the purpose. Byalah boasted large houses, workshops, and many stores. The invading troops were struck by the bountiful grain yields, by the flocks of well-fed and looked-after livestock. But it was the local bridge that really captured their attention. It was destined to play a pivotal role in the war. So, urban or not, why was Byalah important to the Russian commanders? First of all, for its location in the middle of the central part of the Danubian plain. It was equidistant to all the main Ottoman garrisons in northern Bulgaria. Byalah was 55 kilometers from Rусия and Veliko Turnovo, and around 100 kilometers from Pleven and Razgrad, and 50 kilometers from Svistov. The western border of what the Turks called the fortified rectangle passed near the town. Fortified camps in Varna, Silistra, Shumen and Ruse, with the addition of Razgrad, hosted over 150,000 Ottoman troops. Their eastern front. Facing them was Russia's eastern group, led personally by the heir to the imperial throne, Knyaz Prince Alexander Alexandrovich, the future Emperor Alexander III. His force was 70,000 strong, and its main goal was the capture of the town of Ruse, the main Danubian port on Bulgarian soil. The massive Russian deployment was correctly understood by the Ottomans. Correspondingly, they took measures. In turn, Russian intelligence reported large-scale Turkish military movements around Ruse. Based on this information, the Russian commander-in-chief ordered the capture of Byalah, defended as it was by a negligible garrison. There was no time for reinforcements. Despite desperate wires to defend their positions to the last, the garrison abandoned them because of their low morale of the middle and low-ranking officers. In critical times, it always falls to the men to turn the tide. Turkish desperation was compounded by Oriental fatalism. Thus did Russia receive a huge and unexpected gift. On July the 5th, 1877. The Bulgarian population received the incoming Russians with open arms, but Byala's strategic importance was not merely related to its location. There was the bridge. The Byala Bridge. At the time, the Byala Bridge was the largest of its kind on the Balkan Peninsula outside of Istanbul. It spanned the river Yantra and connected Pleven and Ruse. Constructed entirely of blocks of finely cut local limestone and lime mortar, the structure was 276 meters long and 9 meters wide. The Bulgarian architect and master builder Kольо Фичето was responsible for the project and completed it in 2 years, starting in 1865. The orders came from the Danubian region Valya governor Midhat Pasha, a reformer who instigated and oversaw the infrastructure program, including over 200 bridges and a railway line. Midhat Pasha modernized education and simultaneously had no qualms about ordering the execution of anyone who rose in revolt against the empire. The governor threatened the architect with the death penalty should anything go wrong with this, his crowning achievement. Over 300 carpenters, stonemasons, and blacksmiths from all over northern Bulgaria worked on the project under the supervision of Kольо Фичето. He was the preeminent Bulgarian master builder of the era, so confident of his own skills that he had no use for architectural plans. This time, he took Midhat's warning seriously. The bridge was not merely a key part of the infrastructure of northern Bulgaria. The river Yantra flows directly into the Danube, and the bridge was to be on the route between the great European waterway and the Ottoman capital. Failure in producing results for such a crucial element of the imperial road network would indeed be severely punished. Kольо Фичето set about planning in his idiosyncratic way. He asked for a huge amount of beeswax and spent countless days waiting around the river in an attempt to figure out the intricacies of its current. 10 years later, the master would build one of the only 4 covered bridges in Europe, the Lovech Bridge, spanning the river Ossum, reminded one of the Ponte Vecchio in Florence. He was also responsible for the elegant Holy Trinity Church in Svištov. At the time of the Byala Bridge construction, the foundations of Notre Dame in Paris were being eroded by underground water. The symbol of Paris was under threat of total destruction. Like many Ottoman military officers, Midhat spoke French and had friends in high places in French society. He offered the distraught Parisians to send his master builder, who promptly located the source and channeled the water into a fountain. Kольо then returned to his work building the Byala Bridge. As soon as it was completed, everything happened at lightning speed for the locals. The number of houses doubled from 300 to 600. Agriculture and animal husbandry took on a secondary role. Crafts, industry, and trade came to be prominent. Inns, mills, and a distillery came into being. People moved in from all over. There was money to be made here. Turnovo. The Russians formed a forward regiment as soon as they took Svistov. The man in command was General Josef Gurko. While the Russian Imperial High Command was busy fortifying Byalah, Gurko's troops raced south towards the key town of Turnovo. On July the 7th, the regiment Avant-Garde skirmished with the Turks, manning the forward positions of the well-fortified Turnovo garrison. The Russians crashed through, and the Ottomans took to flight. Despite the huge risks, a full-on attack followed, and it was met by massed shooting from the right bank of the Yantra. Gradually, the fighting focused on the Konak, the main administrative building. The Konak was another of Kольо Ficheto's masterpieces and had been completed 5 years earlier. The steep terrain meant the building had 2 floors on the northern side and 4 on the southern. Soon, all 4,000 defenders were forced to withdraw. The taking of Turnovo would prove crucial to the overall outcome of the war. The town controlled the approach to the central section of the Balkan Mountains, and thence to Stara Zagora and the road to Adrianople, the final stretch to the Bosphorus and the Ottoman capital. But aside from its strategic value, Turnovo had a strong symbolic one. Formerly the capital of the Second Bulgarian Empire, between the 12th and the 14th centuries, the settlement had a reputation for invincibility with its vertical rock faces and natural barriers such as hilly terrain and a fast-flowing river. Turnovo became the capital of a large and powerful realm. Often it was referred to as the New Constantinople. With the loss of Svistov, Byalah, its bridge, and Turnovo, the Ottoman military was beginning to lose the psychological battle. Another factor was the enmity of its main commanders, hatred so strong that it would disrupt the otherwise well-ordered Ottoman defensive line. For this unforgivable sin, they would later be court-martialed in Istanbul. As summer wore on, the battles between the Russians and Ottomans to the south of the Danube spread over an even larger territory and took on a particular ferocity. The Turks lost another riverside town, Nikopol. They would later regret their failure to fortify it and defend it properly. We should have turned Nikopol into Pleven. Nikopol should have been Pleven, they would say. Pleven, that town on the Moesian plains at an equal distance between river and mountain, would become world famous by the end of the year. The Russian Emperor Alexandar II, one of the most influential men in the world at the time, arrived in Byalah. He was accompanied by his son, the heir to the throne Alexander Alexandrovich, and the best Russian generals. His nephew, Alexandr Battenberg, was there too, unaware of his uncle's lofty plans to make him prince of the newly liberated Bulgaria. So many of Russia's elite, military men, doctors, artists, historians, diplomats, were in attendance that until August the 13th, Byalah was in effect the capital of the empire. All the important decisions were made here. The retinue stayed at what used to be the harem building for the local Turkish governor Mehmet Bey. Such are the serpentine twists and turns of history. One day, a place may belong to the wives and the courtesans of a ruler. The next, the sworn enemy tramples at the doorstep. The Russians were met in the traditional Bulgarian manner, with bread and salt, not far from Kольо Ficheto's bridge. A Bulgarian circle dance undulated before the emperor. He was far from being totally safe, as he was well within the artillery range of the Turkish positions. Simultaneously, the imperial court circus came into full swing. The best wines and champagne in the world were laid out for the sovereign, as well as cheeses and choice cold cuts. There were those responsible for folding the napkins and those who poured the drinks, all of them army colonels. The generals did not like the soda water that was imported from Bucharest. The chief intendant ordered a soda water fountain to be built from scratch, as well as an ice-making machine. None of this was a spur-of-the-moment thing. Applicants in St. Petersburg and Moscow were invited to bid at public procurement tenders to supply the army. Colossal quantities of food, fuel, and other material were needed to keep the troops in good stead on the battlefield. Corruption skyrocketed long before the first shot was fired. What went on at the elegantly set tables had long been predetermined. A beautiful, noble-looking woman easily navigated the tent-dwelling court. The emperor knew her. She was a lady-in-waiting to his wife. Her name was Baroness Yulia Wrevskaya, and she was a high society scion and mainstay of the most discerning salons in the capital. She hadn't come to Byalah to socialize, though. She, the charming, the unapproachable, and the refined palace lady, was here to wrap the shivering bodies of the wounded in blankets, to daub the blood of the disfigured, to wipe the tears off the faces of the dying. With characteristic bohemian arrogance, the Russians introduced an innovation pioneered by Florence Nightingale during the Crimean War. They put together regiments of nurses that were the wonder of Europe for their number and dedication. An analogy with the Amazon sprang to mind, except the nurses saved lives and didn't take them away. If wartime nursing had been a rather desperate endeavor 20 years earlier, in 1877, these ladies' regiments in their crisp white uniforms inspired awe among men and jealousy among women. Yulia arrived in the Ottoman Empire straight from the St. Petersburg court. She was a star in today's terms. Noble-born, beautiful, charming, educated, she attracted the attention of the emperor himself. And befriended one of the first Russian men of letters to achieve worldwide fame, the novelist Ivan Turgenev. They exchanged nearly 50 letters. At the time, writing a letter took anywhere from a couple of days to a month, sometimes significantly more. The French writer Victor Hugo dedicated poems to her. So why a beautiful society lady would drop it all and go to war? Why would she subject herself to conditions worse than those the soldiers faced? At least they fought and had no time to contemplate the misery surrounding them. Wrevskaya and the other nurses walked among the human debris of the war. Torn, bleeding, disfigured, putrefying men. "Today we have 1,200 wounded," she wrote in her diary one day. 1,200 wounded men, many of them fatally, and 16 women to care for them. The era of automatic weaponry has arrived, and the number of victims has grown exponentially. It was at this point in time that the Russian noble ladies tirelessly fulfilled their duty and cared for their compatriots with valor and devotion. Their beauty and dedication turned them into poster girls of the era, just like actresses would be in the next. Eleonora of Bulgaria, second wife of Tsar Ferdinand, would follow the example of Wrevskaya and her colleagues and would set out towards the battlefields of newly liberated Bulgaria. Wrevskaya and her colleagues were watched over by 300 of Russia's most remarkable medical doctors, some of them professors of world renown. In Bulgaria, they conducted pioneering treatments such as arterial transfusion. They discovered infectious hepatitis. Chief among them was Nikolai Pirogov. It was in Bulgaria that he first applied the plaster cast. At 67, Pirogov was the doyen of Russian medical science, and the emperor asked him personally to head the medical corps. Pirogov assented only when he made sure that he would have total independence. Aside from the doctors, he had around 3,000 nurses at his command. Many Bulgarian medical students volunteered to join from abroad. Wrevskaya sold her estate and used the money to finance a 22-strong unit of volunteer doctors and nurses. She underwent training and headed to the front, where she struck everyone who met her with the beauty, selflessness, bravery, and grace under pressure. Not only did she assist doctors during surgery, not only did she extract bullets and amputate limbs with her own hands, but when needed, she grabbed a rifle and defended the field hospital personally. She went so far as to carry to safety wounded soldiers under enemy fire on 2 separate occasions near the village of Obretenik. After 4 months of back-breaking work, her unit was given 2 months' respite. She wanted to go, but when she found out that the war effort was being undermined by a shortage of medical personnel, she came to Byalah and started to work with the 48th Military Hospital, 3 kilometers across the river Yantra. But she was unlucky. She contracted typhus and died after 2 weeks of intense suffering. She was buried in Byalah, where she left her heart. Her body lies in the courtyard of the Russian Emperor's headquarters. Where did Dr. Pirogov and Yulia Wrevskaya's patients come from? Despite being pushed inland of their key riverine forces by the powerful Russian offensive, Turks were not at all inclined to throw in the towel. Their commanders were dead set on recovering lost territory. They were aware that daring counterattacks were not the way to achieve that goal, and thus settled on a complicated and delicate game of cat and mouse. No one would be safe, not even the emperor's closest circle. the Ottomans received contradictory intelligence about Russian tactical intentions. They believed a 30,000-strong force was headed towards one of their best fortified spots, Stara Zagora. Hence, they were unwilling to weaken it by sending a relief force from there to the Rus' region. The newly appointed commander-in-chief of the Eastern Danubian Army, Mehmet Ali Pasha, in reality an ethnic German by the name of Karl Detroit, sent forward units to get a feel of the Russian positions. The Russians, too, sent out feelers. Several small skirmishes took place. On August the 9th, Detroit sent out a 1,000-strong unit to reconnoiter around the village of Straklovo. They encountered the Russians and engaged them, but losses on both sides were minimal. The Russians were forced to withdraw in the direction of Cherny Lom. Their commanders worried that the main Ottoman force under the command of Suleiman Pasha might begin a general offensive in the south. They were not aware of the growing enmity between the ethnic German and the ethnic Jewish Pashas. Suleiman's real name was Solomon Levi Yavis. In the east, the Ottomans had lost the strategically important port of Nikopol. Logically, the Russians initiated a counteroffensive towards Straklovo. With the support of units from Trstenik and Pirgovo, their entire line was at stake. But the one-upmanship did not stop there. Mehmet Ali feigned an attack in the direction of Bozvelysko. His actual aim was to reach the villages of Katselovo and Gorsko-Oblanovo. The two settlements had been chosen as the center of the Russian defensive line because of their proximity to Byalah, and a breakthrough there would open the way to Svistov, Shipka, and Pleven. The battle began in earnest on August the 24th. The Turks had considerable numerical advantage that could not be made up by the presence of the Crown Prince Alexander Alexandrovich's troops opposite them. Faced with the risk of his army being split in half, the Crown Prince personally led his men in a counterattack. In the final account, the Russians were repelled. They lost 1,300 men and were forced to withdraw to the east bank of the river Cherny Lom. Their defeat was inconsequential, more loss of position than anything else. Heavy fighting took place at Lom Cherkovna and Nikolaevo in September when the Turks attempted to reach Byalah from the southeast. The following month, Prince Sergei Lichtenbergsky was killed during a reconnaissance foray near the village of Ivanovo. He was the grandson of Emperor Nikolai I and nephew of Emperor Alexander II. He had just been promoted to Major General for his role in the capture of Turnovo. Sergei Lichtenbergsky was merely 28 when he died. His brother Nikolai was a decorated cavalry commander who distinguished himself in the battles around Kazanluk, Stara Zagora, and Nova Zagora. Meanwhile, the Ottomans solidified their presence in the Nisovo-Straklovo-Ivanovo triangle. The heaviest clashes were to come in November of 1877 at the villages of Mechka and Trstenik. So far, the Turks had snatched defeat from the jaws of victory at the Great Battle of Shipka Pass. Mehmet Ali had been replaced by his arch-enemy Suleiman Pasha. The latter had failed at Shipka, the most important engagement determining control over the Balkan range. Suleiman could not wait to extract revenge and spared neither men nor material to get it. He pushed in two directions, towards Ivanovo and towards Trstenik Batin. Were he to break through either, Osman was in a quagmire. Even if he was able to withstand the Russian siege, his troops and the Pleven citizenry would starve to death. The heaviest battles came on November 26th and 27th in the vicinity of Mechka, Pirgovo, Trstenik, Shirokovo, Baniska, Batishnica, and Koprivets villages. the Russians held their positions. 2 weeks later, their eastern group, commanded by the Crown Prince Alexandar Alexandrovich, went on the counteroffensive and was finally victorious by December the 1st. Pleven fell 10 days later. The undisputed hero there was General Edward Toltobin, who assumed overall command of the Eastern Group on February the 6th, 1878. Faced with the inevitable, the Ottomans gradually abandoned some of their positions within the rectangle, including Razgrad. The Russians, with Toltobin in the lead, left Byalah and triumphantly entered the Levant fort of Ruse. The town had been a fortress of tremendous strategic importance since Roman times. It really took off under the Ottomans, though. It was selected to be the capital of the Danubian Vilayet. The town was also an important cultural center. It was instrumental in the national revival process and the brewing rebellion against Ottoman authority. The Levant fort stood at the highest point of the town. German engineer Helmut von Moltke had been responsible for the planning. Construction had taken place in the 1820s. The structure was so massive it was used right up until the Second World War, 120 years later. Inside, there were barracks for 300 soldiers. In 1906, 22 years after the Bulgarian liberation, the clock tower of Byalah finally received its own Swiss-made clockwork at the cost of 25,000 gold leva. Money evidently well spent, as the clock keeps ticking away faultlessly to this day. It measures the quickening pace of history and urges us not to fall behind as we try to make sense of it. Military historians still debate the finer points and overall meaning of the great battles of Shipka and Pleven. They are on the curricula of military academies around the world. Behind the valor and tragedy of those historic engagements stands the tremendous job done by the Russian Eastern Group of armies. Which withstood the assault of the best and most numerous Turkish forces and ensured the uninterrupted supply of men, material, munitions, food, and other supplies to the rest of the Russian military. The memory lives on of the noble nurses and brave doctors, of the help Bulgarian volunteers gave the Russian liberators, of the huge battles and the gamble of crucial decisions taken under pressure in the din of war, of the glamour of the imperial court. The memory lives on of the emperor at the same time when Byalah was the capital of the Russian Empire.